A poor 7-year-old girl threw herself in front of a car explosion to save the life of a billionaire's son she had never met. Now, while she fights for her life, that billionaire met someone from his past, and he is about to uncover a truth he never expected. The afternoon sun beat down on the cracked pavement outside Riverside Elementary, turning the air thick with heat and exhaust fumes. Theodore Harper stood near the iron gates, his Tom Ford suit crisp despite the weather, steel-grey eyes fixed on his phone as stock tickers danced across the screen. Around him, parents chatted and laughed, but Theodore remained an island of cold efficiency. Across the street, Emma pressed her thin shoulders against a dying oak tree, her faded pink dress hanging loose on her small frame. In her arms, she clutched a cardboard box of candy bars, each one a chance to eat tonight. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she pushed it down the way her mother taught her. The dismissal bell would ring soon. She had been standing there for 20 minutes, working up courage to approach the parents. A black Mercedes idled at the curb, and beside it stood Marcus, the driver, his phone pressed to his ear. Emma was close enough to hear fragments of his conversation, and something in his tone made her blood run cold. "It's ready. Yes, I have the detonator. 200,000, you promised." Marcus's voice was low and urgent, his free hand gripping a small black device. "I just pressed the button when the kid's inside. I know what I'm doing. He'll never know it was us." The bell rang. Children poured through the gates, laughing, shouting, backpacks bouncing. Emma saw him immediately. The small boy with honey-colored hair and a navy blazer, his face lighting up when he spotted his father. "Daddy!" Jake Harper broke into a run, heading straight for the Mercedes. Marcus slipped the phone into his pocket, fingers white-knuckled around the black device. Theodore looked up from his screen just long enough to give his son a measured smile before returning to his call. Jake reached the car, grabbed the handle, pulled the door open. Emma's heart stopped. Marcus raised the detonator. His thumb hovered over the red button. She ran. Her candy box hit the pavement. Chocolate bars scattered. Her bare feet slapped concrete. Parents turned. Theodore looked up, this ragged girl sprinting toward his son. Emma reached Jake as he climbed into the back seat. Marcus's thumb came down. She grabbed the boy's arm and yanked him backward with everything she had. They fell. She twisted to take the impact, wrapping her arms around him. The Mercedes exploded. Orange flame, black smoke. The car lifted off its wheels. Glass shattered. Metal screamed. The shockwave hit them. Heat stole Emma's breath. Something cracked in her chest. Pain exploded through her ribs. Her vision blurred, darkened, but her arms stayed locked around Jake, her body a shield between him and the flames. The world went silent for 3 heartbeats. Then the screaming started. Theodore's phone hit the ground. His expensive shoes pounded pavement. Parents scattered. Smoke billowed. The Mercedes burned. And through it all, Theodore ran toward his son with a terror he hadn't felt since the day his wife died. He found Jake sitting on the pavement, cradled in the arms of a girl who looked like she weighed nothing at all. Her eyes were closed. Blood seeped from a cut on her forehead. Her chest rose in shallow gasps, but her arms were still locked around Jake, protective even in unconsciousness. Around them, melted candy bars pooled on the concrete, her livelihood abandoned to save a stranger. "Jake!" Theodore's voice cracked as he dropped to his knees. "Are you hurt?" "She saved me, Daddy." Jake's voice was small, thick with tears. "The girl saved me." Theodore looked at Emma's pale face, at the way her small fingers had curled into fists even as she lay broken. And something inside him, something frozen, solid for 10 years, began to crack. She was a child, just a child, selling candy on a street corner while his son rode in a Mercedes. And she had seen the danger he'd been too busy to notice. She had acted while he stood frozen. She had sacrificed while he calculated. Behind them, Marcus stood frozen 15 feet away, the detonator still clutched in his hand, his face grey with shock. He had expected the boy to be inside. He had expected it to be quick, clean, untraceable. He hadn't expected this. Parents were screaming now, pointing at him, at the device in his hand. Someone shouted, "He has the trigger!" Marcus's eyes went wild. Then he ran, disappearing into the chaos before anyone could stop him. Theodore didn't see him go. He gently lifted Emma from Jake's arms, cradling her against his chest. She felt like bird bones and sharp angles, her head lolling against his shoulder, her blood soaked into his suit, warm, sticky, impossibly red. For the first time in 5 years, Theodore wrapped one arm around his son and held him close, really held him, while the other arm supported this dying girl who had saved Jake's life. "Stay with me," Theodore whispered. "Please." Sirens wailed closer. Jake pressed against his father's side, gripping Theodore's jacket. Around them the crowd pressed in, shocked faces, reaching hands, the smell of burning rubber thick in the air. Someone shouted for an ambulance. Someone else was crying. But Theodore heard none of it. He looked down at Emma's face and made a decision that would change everything. This child had seen value in his son's life when Theodore himself had been too distracted to notice danger 3 feet away. Now he would do whatever it took to save her. The ambulance screamed to a stop. Paramedics poured out. Theodore refused to let go. He carried Emma to them himself, laid her on the gurney, watched as they worked. Oxygen mask, IV line, pressure on the wounds. Her vitals were crashing. They needed to move now. "I'm coming with you," Theodore said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He scooped Jake into his arms and climbed into the ambulance before anyone could protest. The paramedic started to object, then saw Theodore's face and simply nodded. The doors slammed, the siren wailed, and as the ambulance pulled away from the burning wreckage, Theodore Harper held his son close and watched the small girl who had saved Jake's life fight for every breath. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she came from. He didn't know that in a few hours, when her mother arrived at the hospital, his entire world would shatter. All he knew was that he owed this child everything, and for the first time in 10 years, Theodore Harper felt something beyond cold calculation. He felt human. If this story has grabbed hold of your heart, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. The fluorescent lights of St. Augustine's Hospital hummed with sterile precision. Theodore Harper sat in the waiting room, elbows on his knees, phone pressed to his ear. His expensive watch glinted under the white light as he spoke in his usual detached tone, calm, controlled, businesslike. "Yes, alert legal. Make sure the press doesn't get the explosion footage. I want the police report within the hour," he said, voice clipped. "Yes, I'll take care of the hospital costs personally. Send the forms to my assistant." He hung up, exhaling slowly, as if what just happened were an unfortunate market error, not an act of terror. His mind clung to order. Calculation steadied him. Behind the glass walls, doctors rushed past in scrubs. Every sound, the squeak of shoes, the beeping of a monitor, pressed at his control. Jake sat beside him, head resting against his father's arm, fingers still trembling. Across the room, Marcus sat in silence, his chauffeur's uniform smudged with soot. He looked small now, hunched, hands clasped between his knees. His mouth twitched each time a doctor walked by. Theodore hadn't noticed him yet. Not truly. To Theodore, he was just another employee who had done his job poorly. But Marcus's eyes told a different story. They followed every passing nurse, every whisper. Sweat gathered on his forehead despite the air conditioning. When Scarlett arrived, the hallway turned theatrical. Her heels clicked sharply on the tile. Her tailored dress was immaculate, as if she'd come from a gala rather than a crisis. "Where is he?" she gasped, voice trembling, eyes wide with rehearsed panic. She rushed to Theodore, wrapping her arms around him as though the two shared an intimacy long gone. "Theodore, I came as soon as I heard. Are they safe? Is Jake—" Her voice cracked at just the right syllable. Jake looked up, confused. "He's fine," Theodore said, freeing himself gently. "He has a few scratches. The other child, they're in surgery." His tone remained eerily level, as if afraid warmth might undo him. "Oh, thank God." Scarlett pressed a manicured hand to her chest. A tear, perfect and deliberate, slid down her cheek. Theodore didn't notice the angle at which her eyes flicked to Marcus, or how he looked away instantly, shoulders tensing. But a nurse passing by did, and frowned. For a fleeting moment, Scarlett's mask slipped. Her lips tightened, her gaze darted toward the far corridor. Then, as if sensing Theodore's attention returning, she softened again, face of devotion, voice of a martyr. "You did everything you could, darling. This isn't your fault." He accepted the words because they required no feeling in return. A hospital attendant entered. "Mr. Harper, the little girl, Emma, is still in surgery. It's critical." The name struck him, Emma, short, fragile, beautiful, in the way every forgotten child should be remembered. He nodded, unable to speak, and turned toward the window overlooking the emergency wing doors. Beyond them, he caught a reflection, a flash of movement, Scarlett and Marcus at the far end of the corridor, heads close, voices low. The sight threw a crack of static through his composure. Something in Scarlett's posture, her familiarity, her control, made his ribs tighten. But before he could think further, another voice pierced the air. "Theodore?" He turned. At first, he didn't recognize her. The woman standing in the doorway looked small against the pale light of the corridor. Her hair was tied back messily, her skirt worn at the edges, her hands trembling around a folded hospital form. Her eyes, those eyes, he remembered them, though years had weighed on them like stones. "Claire!" His voice was nearly a whisper. She froze, shock and anguish colliding, her face drained of color. The sound of his voice, unmistakable, gentler than it used to be, made her inhale sharply. She had come running because she'd heard a girl named Emma was brought here after an explosion. Her Emma. Her entire world. And now, inches away, stood the man who had once promised her forever, the man who had chosen silence instead. For a long heartbeat, the world fell away. No monitors, no footsteps, just two people bound by a decade of regret and words unsaid. "I didn't know," Theodore began, but Claire's expression silenced him. Not rage, not vengeance. Something quieter, colder. The years had stripped her voice of softness, but not of truth. "She's my daughter," Claire said, steady, proud, though tears filled her eyes. "The little girl who saved your son." Theodore's throat tightened. "Your daughter?" "Yes, Emma." She swallowed hard. "She sells candy after school, every day, because we have to eat." He wanted to speak, to explain 1,000 things, but every word caught in his throat and died there. Up close, he saw the calluses on her hands, the faint bruises from carrying boxes, the exhaustion in her face, but also the quiet fire in her eyes, the kind of strength he had long forgotten existed. "I'm sorry." The words came out strangled, thin. Claire shook her head. "Don't. Not now." She took a step back, gripping her bag. "Your son's alive. That's what matters." Her gaze drifted to Jake, who clung shyly to Theodore's sleeve. When Jake whispered, "She saved me," Claire's lips trembled, but she forced herself to smile. "I know she did," she said softly. "That's just who she is." Theodore looked at Claire the way a man looks at a life he once discarded. Every part of him screamed to ask, "Where did you go? What happened to us?" But something in her quiet made him stay silent. It was her dignity, tired, scarred and luminous, that stripped him of pretense. He turned away for a moment, blinking hard as if the act alone could erase the weight pressing on his chest. Behind him, Scarlett reappeared, voice icy sweet. "You know this woman?" she asked, studying Claire from head to toe. Her tone dripped expertise in condescension, disguised as curiosity. "She's—" Theodore hesitated, a dozen truths tangled in his throat. "She's the girl's mother." Scarlett offered a false smile. "Oh, how brave of her, little one." Then, turning to Claire, she lowered her voice, a hushed dagger. "I hope for her sake the hospital accepts charity cases." Claire blinked but said nothing. She refused to lower herself. Instead, she looked at Theodore, her voice so calm it hurt. "She doesn't need charity. Just a chance to live." Theodore felt the weight of her words like a silent blow. For the first time, he really saw Claire's calloused hands, the marks of carrying boxes of candy through the rain, the short nails of someone who washed clothes at night just to keep going. Beside her, Scarlett absently polished an invisible speck from her manicure, oblivious to the canyon between the two women. The contrast hit him like a flash. One life built on polished appearances, the other on raw survival. He looked away, ashamed that he had spent years building an empire on the kind of pride Claire carried without effort. Then she turned toward the surgical doors, whispering something under her breath. Perhaps a prayer, perhaps her daughter's name. Theodore watched her go. Inside him, two worlds, once kept fiercely separate, collided. The sterile wealth of his life with Scarlett, the calm, controlled existence, and this glimpse of something raw, human, and unbearably real. He sank onto the waiting bench beside Jake, his mind racing with numbers he couldn't calculate. Across the hallway, Marcus approached Scarlett again, whispering urgently. She stiffened, glancing around before making a sharp gesture for him to leave. Theodore caught it, briefly, subconsciously, and something inside him stirred. Unease. Instinct. The faintest crack in the facade of the woman he had trusted. That was when the surgeon appeared. The man's expression was grim. "Mr. Harper, Ms. Claire," he said quietly, "your daughter is still fighting, but it's critical. We're doing everything we can." Claire didn't move. She just nodded once, a single tear tracking down her cheek. Theodore stood beside her without thinking, his hand hovering near hers but not daring to touch. "Will she make it?" he asked. The doctor hesitated. "We don't know yet. Tonight we'll decide." Silence pressed between them. For the first time since the explosion, Theodore felt powerless. Not in the way business failures humbled him, but in a way that reached his soul. Money couldn't fix this. Control couldn't fix this. Only faith or fate could. As the doctor walked away, the corridor seemed to contract around them. Neon lights flickered. A mother prayed under her breath. Somewhere, a monitor beeped steadily like a second hand counting down. Theodore looked at Claire, at the woman who once carried his child in secret, and realized he had spent his life building an empire so vast he couldn't see the human beings beneath his own walls. Through the glass pane of the ICU, he saw Emma's small body on the bed, tubes, bandages, machines breathing for her, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years, the pure, helpless ache of love. Scarlett's voice, cold and distant, broke the moment. "Theodore, come home. There's nothing more you can do tonight." He didn't turn. "You can go," he said. "I'm staying." Her heels clicked once behind him, then silence. In the reflection of the glass, Claire stood beside him, not speaking, not forgiving, just waiting. Two souls holding vigil over the same broken child, unaware she was the bridge between their past mistakes and the redemption neither of them knew they needed. Rain slid down the hospital windows in restless streams, softening the city lights into trembling halos. The world outside seemed distant, suspended in a kind of waiting, and inside, Theodore Harper sat motionless beside Emma's bed. Her chest rose under the thin hospital blanket in slow, uneven rhythm. Tubes breathed for her. Every time the monitor skipped, he found himself holding his own breath until the next beep came. He hadn't left since the surgery. His phone lay abandoned on the counter, still flashing with unread messages. The suit he'd worn earlier hung over a chair, blood-stained but folded with precise care, as if order might keep chaos at bay. Jake slept curled under a blanket nearby, a bandage on his temple. In the quiet hum of machines, Theodore's mind replayed the explosion, the sound, the heat, the moment he saw a child he'd never met wrap her arms around his son. Across the hall, the vending machine rattled. Marcus stood there, eyes hollow, fumbling with loose change. He hadn't gone home either. Every time he blinked, he saw the flash of orange fire, heard her scream. He could still feel her tiny weight when he'd carried her into the ambulance. The same girl he'd nearly killed. He looked down at his trembling hands and whispered a kind of prayer under his breath. He didn't believe in God, but guilt had a way of making even liars beg for mercy. The elevator pinged softly. Scarlett stepped out, dressed in an immaculate beige coat. Her presence seemed to sharpen the fluorescent light. She spotted Theodore through the glass wall and forced a smile before entering the room. "You're still here?" Her tone was light, too light. "It's been hours, Theo. You need rest." "I'll rest when she wakes up," he said quietly. Scarlett's smile thinned. "You're not her father." For a moment, the beeping monitors filled the space between them. Then Theodore turned his eyes toward her. "No, but she saved my son. That's enough." His words left no room for reply, yet Scarlett lingered, pacing near the foot of the bed. Her hands kept moving, adjusting her collar, twisting her wedding ring, shifting her purse from one arm to another. She couldn't stand still, and every slight movement only deepened the crease between Theodore's brows. Marcus appeared in the doorway, intending to speak, but froze when he saw Scarlett. Their eyes met for barely a second, enough for guilt to flash like lightning between them. She turned away sharply. Theodore caught it. His gaze lingered on Marcus a moment longer than it should have, the way one stares at a puzzle piece that doesn't fit. "Mr. Harper, I just wanted to check if the boy needed anything," Marcus stammered. "We're fine," Theodore said, voice clipped. Marcus bowed his head and disappeared down the corridor. Scarlett's face had drained of color. "He shouldn't even be here," she muttered, snatching her coat from the chair. "You pay him too much to lurk." Theodore didn't answer. He was looking again at the bed, at the fragile hand resting near the railing, bruised and motionless. "He helped bring her in," he said distantly. "He can stay if he wants." Scarlett stiffened. For a second, something sharp flickered in her expression, fear, anger, or both, but she smoothed it over quickly. "Fine," she said, voice cool. "I'll go check on your son." When the door closed behind her, Theodore exhaled for the first time in minutes. The noise of rain filled the empty space she left behind. Later that night, the nurse dimmed the lights. Claire sat in silence at the other side of the bed, hands clasped near Emma's arm. Her exhaustion showed in the droop of her shoulders, but her gaze never wavered. Theodore watched her, wondering how someone who had survived so much could still look so gentle. "She's strong," he said softly. Claire nodded. "She had to be." A pause. Life doesn't leave room to stay weak. He opened his mouth, closed it again. There were so many words locked inside him, apologies, explanations, memories, but none fit the moment. Instead, he reached for the blanket that had slipped from Emma's legs and pulled it higher. Claire noticed the gesture and met his eyes. Something unspoken passed between them, fragile, tentative, but real. The hallway door clicked open. Marcus stood halfway in, his cap wet from rain. "Mr. Harper, may I have a word?" Theodore rose, but Claire touched his sleeve lightly. "Stay. I can handle her," she whispered, thinking he meant Scarlett. He hesitated, then stepped into the corridor, closing the door halfway behind him. "What is it?" Marcus swallowed hard. His voice shook. "Sir, about the car. There's something I need to—" Scarlett's voice cut through the hallway. "Marcus!" Both men turned. She stood at the end of the corridor, her expression smooth but her eyes blazing. "Theo, let the man go home," she said sweetly. "He looks terrible." Marcus paled. Whatever confession had been building collapsed under her stare. He muttered an apology and left. Scarlett approached slowly, her heels silent on the tile. What did he want? Theodore looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I'm not sure. Maybe he feels guilty." "For what?" "For surviving," he said simply, and walked back into the room. Scarlett stayed behind, fingers tightening around her purse. Inside, the night steadied again. Claire had drawn her chair closer to the bed. Theodore sat on the opposite side, elbows on his knees, watching Emma's face through the rhythm of the machines. Outside, thunder rolled. Time moved differently here, measured by the beating of other lungs. Hours passed. Nurses drifted in and out. Jake stirred, whimpered in his sleep. Scarlett kept to the corridor, pacing, checking her phone, a low current of panic in every movement. The weight of silence pressed on all of them until just before dawn. Emma's eyelids fluttered. Claire straightened, scarcely daring to breathe. The monitor bleeped faster. Theodore stood, heart slamming against his ribs. "Emma?" Claire whispered. The child's lips parted. Her voice came out as a rasp, small, uncertain. "Mom?" "I'm here, baby." Claire took her hand, gently. Emma's eyes moved, struggling to focus. They found Theodore blurry through the oxygen haze. She frowned faintly, as if remembering. "The car," she murmured. "The driver. Phone." The silence that followed was electric. Theodore saw Claire's eyes widen, not just in fear, but with an old certainty she had never dared to speak aloud. Out in the hallway, Marcus froze mid-step, the paper cup in his hand trembling as coffee sloshed against the rim. A few meters away, Scarlett pretended to adjust her necklace, but her fingers clamped around the metal until her knuckles went white. No one said a word, but everyone understood. A 7-year-old girl had just seen what adults had paid to keep buried. Her lashes trembled, and she fell back into sleep. Claire looked up at Theodore, eyes wide, fear and realization twisting together. He turned toward the hallway, where Marcus's shadow lingered under the exit light, and Scarlett's reflection crossed just behind it. The first sliver of morning touched the window pane, pale and cold. Inside the room, nothing moved but the steady rise and fall of Emma's chest, fragile proof that truth at last had begun to wake. The morning light slipped through the hospital blinds in pale stripes, touching everything with quiet mercy. After a night of rain and alarms, the world felt hesitant, like it too was recovering. Theodore Harper stood at the foot of Emma's bed, his grey eyes fixed on the slow rise and fall of her chest. Her skin was still pale, her lips faintly dry, but she was alive. He couldn't stop looking at her. Claire sat beside her, brushing strands of dark hair from the girl's forehead. No rings on her fingers, no perfume, no shield between her and pain. Just a mother, fragile but unbreakable. The sight burned through Theodore's chest in a way he couldn't name. Emma stirred. The small sound drew both of them closer. She opened her eyes, hazy, searching, and blinked at the morning light. "Where am I?" she whispered. "You're safe," Claire said quickly, voice gentler than prayer. "You're in the hospital. You had an accident, sweetie." Emma's brow frowned slightly. "The car. I heard him." He said he'd press the button. Theodore leaned forward. You heard someone say that? She nodded faintly. The driver, and a woman's voice on the phone. She told him to do it. Her eyelids trembled, too heavy to stay open. Then she slipped back into sleep. Claire's hand covered her mouth to hold back a sob. Theodore froze. A woman's voice on the phone. Jake's stepmother waiting outside the house, calling in fake panic. The fragments mapped themselves into a shape too terrible to name. He straightened slowly. Stay with her, he said. Please. Then he left the room. Scarlett was in the cafeteria, pouring coffee with shaking hands. When she saw him coming, she pasted on her perfect expression, the one made for charity events and press photos. Theo, thank God I was just coming to find you. He stopped 2 steps away. She woke up. Scarlett brightened. The little one? Oh, that's wonderful. She told us what she heard. The driver was talking to someone before the explosion. A woman. The color left Scarlett's face. She reached for her necklace, hiding the tremor in her fingers. That child's confused, she said. Trauma does that. You can't believe Marcus was on the phone with you, wasn't he? Her cup clattered against the counter, spilling coffee across white tile. For a moment, neither spoke. Behind them, a vending machine hummed. Scarlett's voice returned thin and sharp. You're accusing me of what, exactly? Attempted murder, came another voice. Marcus. He stood at the end of the hallway, uniform wrinkled, eyes red. A guard's hand rested uncertainly on his shoulder, ready to restrain him if he tried to run. But Marcus didn't run. He looked straight at Theodore. She paid me, he whispered. She said it would look like an accident, that you'd collect insurance, nobody'd suspect. I didn't know there was a kid in the car. I swear. The echo of Marcus's confession hung in the corridor like smoke. The officers moved almost in unison, reaching for Scarlett's arms as if they had rehearsed this moment for years. She didn't scream at first. Worse, she smiled, a thin, brittle smile that promised revenge in courtrooms and back rooms. You'll regret this, she hissed, eyes locked on Theodore as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. Jake's small hand tightened around his father's, and for once Theodore had no calculated answer, no measured reassurance. He only pulled his son closer, feeling the world he had built collapse, and something cleaner begin to rise from the rubble. Scarlett lunged, but security moved faster. The officer stepped between them. That's enough. The next moments blurred. Voices, commands, Scarlett shouting his name as they led her away. She twisted once toward him, every trace of grace gone. You'll regret turning on me. He watched silently as the blue lights pulsed against the glass doors, her figure swallowed by reflections. Marcus followed, head bowed. Theodore stood there long after the noise faded. His pulse slowed, the silence thickened. When he finally turned, Claire was in the corridor, Emma's blanket draped over her arm. She looked at him, really looked, understanding more than words could carry. She told the truth, Claire said softly. I should have seen it, all of it. His voice broke, quiet but raw. I left Jake with a stranger because she fit the image my world required. Claire hesitated, then took a step closer. You can see it now. That's what matters. For a long moment, neither moved. The distance of 8 years shrank to the space of a breath. That afternoon, the hospital calmed into routine again. Police finished taking statements. Jake sat beside Emma's bed, showing her his toy car with the reverence of a child who'd seen death too close. Theodore watched them from the doorway, the guilt pressing heavier than ever. He crouched beside Jake. Hey, champ! The boy looked up, tentative. I should have never left you alone with her, Theodore said quietly. I thought keeping busy was the same as taking care of you. I was wrong. Jake blinked, then climbed into his father's arms and buried his face in his chest. It was awkward at first, the hug of a man out of practice, but it broke something open. When Theodore looked up again, Claire was standing near the curtain. She didn't speak, but her eyes softened at the sight. For the first time, the air around them felt less heavy, like something wounded had begun to heal. Night came gently. A nurse turned off the hallway lights. Emma slept again, tubes removed, breathing steady. Claire dozed upright in the chair, exhaustion pulling her features into calm lines. Jake had fallen asleep near the window, knees tucked under Theodore's jacket. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. Theodore sat between them all, his old life and the one he'd thrown away. The silence was so pure he could hear every breath. He glanced at Emma. Her fingers twitched against the blanket. Slowly, carefully, she opened her eyes again. "Hey," he whispered. "Go back to sleep. You're safe." She studied him for a moment. "Mom said, you used to know a man named Theo." Every muscle in his body stilled. "She told you that?" Emma nodded weakly. "She said he was kind before he left. I think you remind her of him." He opened his mouth, but no sound came. The light from the corridor cut across her face, the soft angle of her jaw, the faint dimple on her left cheek. He recognized it instantly. Claire had the same one. His gaze dropped to her eyes, not brown like her mother's, pale grey-blue. His color. Theodore swallowed hard. The math unfolded uninvited. Emma's age, Claire's disappearance, the timing. 7 years old. 8 since he had walked away in silence. He reached forward, brushing a small lock of hair from her forehead, fingers trembling. She smiled faintly at the touch, trusting even half awake. "Rest now," he managed. "We'll talk later." She drifted back to sleep. Across the room, Claire shifted in her chair, eyes fluttering open just long enough to meet his. For a second, he thought she saw the truth already glowing on his face, but she just smiled gently and whispered, "Thank you, Theo." Then she slept again. Theodore stared at the child between them, heartbeat thundering against his ribs. The pieces fit so perfectly it hurt to breathe. He pressed his hand to his mouth, eyes wet, not from grief, but from the terrifying hope dawning in his chest. He had come here to thank a stranger's child. He now feared he'd found his own. The story broke at dawn. Hospitals, boardrooms, and breakfast tables across the city lit up with the same headline: "A billionaire's wife arrested for orchestrating a car bombing against her own stepson." Reporters crowded outside St. Augustine's, cameras flashing against the glass doors, shouting questions that never made it past security. Inside, the world moved differently, quiet, slow, as if mercy had lowered the volume. Theodore Harper stood by the window of Emma's recovery room, sleeves rolled up, the lines around his eyes deeper than they had been a week before. On the wall, the television murmured with Scarlett's name and face, looped footage of her being led away in handcuffs. He picked up the remote and muted the screen. There was nothing left he needed to hear about her. When Claire walked in, she brought the smell of cheap coffee and something softer. Peace, or the beginning of it. She handed him a cup. "I figured you didn't sleep," she said. "Didn't want to," he answered. "I've wasted too many nights awake over things that didn't matter. This one I needed to live through." They stood side by side, looking out at the city waking up. Cars flowed like small veins of light through the streets. After a moment he spoke again. "I spent my life thinking love was control," he said quietly. "Pick the right person, shape the right life, force everything into place. It took almost losing my son and your daughter to realize love is the opposite. It's surrender." Claire's eyes flicked to his face, studying him as if he were a stranger she was deciding whether to trust. You only ever talked like that when you weren't trying to impress anyone, she said, the corner of her mouth lifting. Maybe this is the first time in years. I'm not. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was new. Later Jake came in, clutching a drawing. 3 stick figures held hands under a crooked yellow sun. He ran straight to his father. Emma drew this, he announced. She said it's our new team. Theodore dropped to one knee to be eye level. Then we'd better show her how a real team works, he said. Jake flung his arms around his neck. The hug was clumsy and too tight, the kind that leaves you breathless in a good way. Theodore closed his eyes, one hand on his son's back, aware of every second he had taken this boy for granted. Not anymore, he promised silently. Not again. When he stepped back into Emma's room, she was propped up against pillows, crayons spread across her blanket. Sunlight painted soft halos on her hair. She smiled when she saw him. You look better today, he said. So do you, she replied. You don't look empty anymore. He pulled a chair closer. Rough week for both of us. Emma giggled faintly. Then her face grew thoughtful. Mom used to talk about someone named Theo, she said. She said he was kind before he left. The air left his lungs. She told you that? He asked. Emma nodded. She said he was the bravest person she ever knew. I think that's why she doesn't like talking about him. It makes her eyes shiny. Theodore swallowed. Only one person in his life had ever called him Theo with that much affection. His pulse began to pound in his ears. Emma, he asked softly, do you know when your birthday is? She told him the date. The numbers clicked into place like a lock, finally turning. 7 years. 8 since Claire had disappeared from his life without a word he had cared to hear. His hand trembled as he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's forehead. She leaned into the touch without fear, as if part of her had always been waiting for it. Get some rest, he whispered. You're safe now. Okay, Mr. Harper, she murmured. Theodore, he corrected gently. Or Theo, if you want. Her lips curved in a sleepy smile. Like the man Mom loved? His voice almost broke. Yes, just like him. She drifted back to sleep, fingers still curled around a crayon. That evening, the sun dipped low, painting the hospital garden in amber. Theodore stood outside, elbows resting on the cold metal railing, staring at nothing. He heard footsteps behind him but didn't turn until Claire stopped at his side. She told me, he said, about Theo. Claire's shoulders tensed. She kept her eyes on the horizon. What did she say? That you used to talk about a man by that name. That he was kind before he left. He drew a shaking breath. Nobody called me Theo except you. For the first time she looked at him fully. There was no anger there now, only a tired sadness and something softer beneath. I asked her when her birthday was, he continued. It lines up exactly. The age, the timing, the day you walked away, and I never chased you. His voice roughened. Tell me I'm wrong. She closed her eyes, as if bracing against a wave. When she opened them again, they shone with unshed tears. You're not wrong, she said. The words hit harder than the explosion. He took one step back, shame washing through him so fiercely he almost turned away. Claire saw it, and instead of letting him retreat, reached out and caught his forearm, holding him there. Don't run, she said quietly. We've both done enough of that. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then back at her face. All these years, he said hoarsely, while I built towers and chased numbers, my daughter was selling candy on street corners to eat, and I didn't even know her name. You didn't know you had a name to learn, Claire answered. I was the one who left with the secret. I did what I thought I had to do to survive. So did you. Different sides of the same mistake. His eyes filled, and this time he didn't fight it. Can you ever forgive me? Claire's grip on his arm tightened, not in anger but in steadiness. Forgiveness isn't a switch I flip, she said. It's a road, but you're already walking it, and you're not walking it alone. In the weeks that followed, Theodore learned what no business school had ever taught him: how to change a bandage at 3 a.m, how to hum off-key lullabies until a child stopped trembling, how to sit on a cold hospital chair just to watch Emma draw her first real picture of a family in crayon. Every laugh that escaped her cracked his armor a little more. Claire watched from the doorway at times, still cautious, but her smiles came easier now. The mansion he once returned to like a polished tomb would soon smell less like marble and more like Play-Doh, spilled juice, and new beginnings. Weeks slipped by. Scarlett's trial ended with the sentence read in a packed courtroom. Marcus testified with shaking hands but clear conscience. Theodore watched from the back, feeling only quiet closure. Emma came home, not to the streets, but to the mansion that had always felt like a museum. The first night, her laughter echoed through marble halls that had known only silence for years. Jake showed her every room, ending with the garden pool under starlight. That evening, Theodore found Claire on the terrace, looking out at the city lights. "This house was empty before you came," he said. "Now it's a home." She turned, eyes soft. "Only if we fill it with the right people." He took her hand. "Then stay, all of you. Make it yours." Claire looked back at the glowing windows where their children played. "We will," she whispered. 6 months later, the mansion that once echoed with emptiness overflowed with life. Children's voices bounced off vaulted ceilings. The garden, once pristine and untouched, now held a swing set and chalk drawings on the stone paths. Emma's crayons covered the breakfast table. Jake's toy cars lined the grand staircase. Theodore Harper woke each morning not to stock tickers, but to the sound of his daughter giggling over pancakes. He had sold 3 companies, redirected billions into foundations, and learned to tie pigtails, skills far more valuable than any boardroom victory. Scarlett's empire had crumbled completely, her assets frozen, her name synonymous with betrayal. Marcus, granted leniency for his testimony, now managed the center named for Emma, finding purpose in the work he once lacked. But Theodore's true transformation shone brightest on a perfect spring afternoon. The garden bloomed with white roses and golden sunlight. Chairs lined the emerald lawn, filled with faces from 2 worlds, executives in quiet awe beside street vendors who had known Claire's struggle. Jake, ring-bearer with a grin too big for his face, bounced at the altar. Emma, flower girl in a dress that twirled like petals, scattered blossoms with deliberate slowness, savoring every second. Claire walked down the aisle on her own 2 feet, not as the poor girl from 8 years ago, but as the woman who had carried both love and loss without breaking. Her simple white dress caught sunlight like a promise kept. Theodore waited at the end. No Tom Ford suit, just a linen shirt rolled to his elbows, the man he had finally become. When Claire reached him, he took both her hands, voice thick. "I spent years building walls," he said clearly for all to hear. "You taught me they were meant to come down," the officiant smiled. "Theodore Harper, do you take this woman—" "I do," he said before the words finished. "Every day, for the rest of my life." Claire's eyes shone. "And I take you, the man you were, the man you are, the man you'll be." Jake cheered before anyone else. Emma clapped, petals flying from her basket. The garden erupted. Later, as golden hour painted everything warm, Theodore lifted champagne glasses to the crowd. 7 years ago, a little girl saved my son from fire. Today, she saved me from myself, to Emma, to second chances, to family." The mansion glowed behind them, a monument not to wealth, but to redemption. As stars emerged, Theodore found Claire by the fountain, watching their children chase fireflies. He slipped his arm around her waist. "Happy," he whispered. She leaned into him. For the first time in years, completely. In the distance, Emma's Place lights twinkled across the city, a beacon for every child still waiting to be seen. And in that moment, Theodore understood true wealth wasn't measured in towers or dollars, but in the small hands that held his own. Some lives shatter to make room for miracles. Others explode to reveal what was always meant to be.